All right, so now that we've got the OpenExo code on our computer, we'll go into a little bit of orientation as to what's here, what you should be concerned with. So in the OpenExo folder, starting off, you can see we've got a documentation folder. In here, you can find documentation for adding new controllers, CAN motors, boards. So anytime you want to modify the code to include, say you're making your own controller for OpenExo, this is where you're going to go for information on how to do that. We won't go into that now. That's not in the scope of this video, but for your information, that's where that documentation can be found. There's also documentation for some of the controllers in here. You can see we've got the hip controllers here. Frank's Collins controller has some documentation for it. Those are the main two that you should be concerned with. And then here you can see ExoCode. This file right here is essentially the conductor for all of the ExoCode. You can see it's an Arduino file, and it takes all of the OpenExo code files and essentially communicates with them, tells them what to do, and orchestrates the whole EXO. And so you've got the conductor here, and then you've got all of the individual instruments here. This is all of the EXO code that gets run on the EXO, that gets flashed to the EXO. Anytime you flash, this is what's getting flashed. And so this is where you can modify controllers. So if you go to documentation and you want to add a new controller, it'll tell you to go to like parse.ini.h. All of the files that most of the files that it mentions here, so like controller data.h, you can find that in SRC, and then controller data.h right there. So this is anytime you want to modify what the exoskeleton does code-wise, like adding a new controller, changing or adding a new motor, stuff like that, that's where this is going to be done. So moving on, the next file that we're going to be, or folder that we're going to be concerned with is the Python GUI. This is the graphical user interface that I've been mentioning. This is what essentially runs the exoskeleton. We'll be diving into this folder shortly. Also, we have the SDCard folder. This is what gets uploaded to that SD card that goes into the Teensy, and it holds configuration information. And so you can see config.ini. This is essentially this essentially tells the EXO what configuration of the EXO you're using, so like bilateral hip, or you can use bilateral hip ankle, elbow, and so on. Some of the other configuration information that you can find here is your gearing ratios, whether you're using left or right side or both sides, bilateral, what motors you'll be using, the controller that you'll be using, so on and so forth. But we'll go more into detail on editing the stuff in this file once we get to the relevant section. And then moving on, you can see we've got folders for ankle controllers, elbow controllers, hip controllers, knee controllers. And you can go into here. The files within these folders contain configuration information for the specific controllers that we have in the code. And so you can see we've got configuration information for the Frank's Collins hip controller. And that's just in a little CSV file. And we'll go into editing this and what the information here actually means. But anytime you want to change torque commands or change like tune PID control, that's where this is going to be done. And we'll go more into detail on that later. But that's kind of just some orientation information. Again, you've got documentation stuff here. You've got the actual OpenExo code. You've got the conductor of the code, and then all the individual instruments. And then you've got the GUI folder, which we'll be diving into later, and the SD card folder, which we will also be diving into later.